Welcome to my teaching learning session of Foundation of Psychology. I am Sonal Singh Pawar, an academic counselor for psychology courses for BPC 131. Today we continue with Unit 3, which is learning, as we were doing before. Let's start with a basic definition to understand what is learning. Learning is a relatively permanent change in your behavior which is backed by an experience. So remember, learning is something which would be a change in your behavior. So we require a change in the behavior, but that will happen permanent only if it is backed by an experience. That is, it's costing an experience to you. It has an experience around it. Also, the last time we introduced you motor learning, verbal learning, and concept learning. So let's quickly understand what is motor learning. Motor learning is something which is around, motor means muscle. So learning which helps in adaptation, movement of your muscles and body is motor learning. Motor learning happens at the age of 2 and 3, where the muscle development of children starts and is formed and complete of fine motor skills and gross motor skills that you study in lifespan development is something that completes by 3 years of age. So that is motor learning, helps you walk, drive, climb, move around, wave to somebody. That is all motor learning. Verbal learning, one of the most expansive learning to human beings because it uses language, speech, helps you it helps you acquire the skills to communicate with people. So it uses words, it uses pictures, and also sounds, because speech is worthwhile when you speak and has sound in it. The last that we will discuss would be discriminative learning out of it. Discriminative learning is the ability to differentiate between items and concepts and things around you. So let's take an example. A simple example of discriminative learning could be colors also, discriminating between colors. And another kind of learning is concept learning. Concept learnings are categories. Categories could be of anything. Let's take an example, categories of animals, categories of flowers. So when we talk about categories of animal, that's a concept. Animal has many concepts within it, which is it has many small categories. We have domestic animals, we have aquatic animals. So that becomes category. And concept has rules within it. Let's take an example of a domestic animal example. Domestic animals have 4 legs. Domestic animal talks about having a furry animals, tail, legs, and they have a sound. Dog becomes one of them. Cat could be another one. So the rules and features delimit the category and it differentiates it from the other categories that you have, which could be aquatic. Aquatic animals do not have fur. They do not have something which is a tail. So they have inbuilt gills which helps them breathe in the water. So that is a concept learning. Concept learning enable us to differentiate a lot of things in our environment, form categories, and enable us to function in society. Now let's come to the major understanding, which you can see on my screen, which is theories of learning. We will start with the most important theory, which is the classical conditioning. Let's understand, is there any difference between classical conditioning and something which is learning? No. Conditioning is a part of learning. So learning becomes the umbrella term which leads to change, which is permanent and has an experience. And conditioning is a kind of learning which happens because of training. So conditioning can be a little more mechanical because it involves connection between S and R. What is S and R? Let's understand. Behaviorism, when we were talking about in the first class of behaviorist evolution, SNR, stimulus and response. So behavior is what? Behavior is the response that you give from a stimuli. So any stimuli can be anything that elicit a response, that can give a response. So let's take an example. A fan can also be a stimuli because it provides you air, and the response to it is you feel comfortable in a heated environment. Having a fan around you, you always feel more comfortable. A pen can also be a stimuli because it can elicit a response, which is it can give out a response. How? It can help you write. It can help you put something on the table, stop something on the table. So that becomes an S and R. Conditioning is a kind of learning, but involves the connection between S and R. So the first theory that you see on my screen is Pavlovian classical conditioning. It was given by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. He was a Russian psychologist and also a physician first and then a psychologist. I will tell you the entire experiment here when we talk about And Pavlovian experiment is based on animal experiments. Animal experiments were legal by this point of time, and after animal experiment conductions being safe, we moved on to human experiments also later. So this is the first animal experiment that happened in learning on dogs. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was a physician first, turned into a psychologist. He showed a kind of conditioning that involved pairing of two S's, which is the conditioning equation comes out to be stimulus leading to another stimulus leading to a response. So remember, it's going to be an SSR conditioning. So we train people to give out a response when they are trained to give one stimulus, after that another stimulus, and then a response. So this is an SSR conditioning. Let me tell you some terms which will help you understand the experiment which was done by Ivan Pavlov on his own dog that he did. So we need to understand few terms here. One is called the unconditioned stimuli. What is unconditioned? The one which is not trained, the one which is not conditioned. It happens naturally. So remember our desire to eat something. Mouth watering is something which happens naturally. Tell me a day in the morning when you're very hungry, the breakfast is not served till the time of 10 and 11, and you're feeling, mouth watering is happening as soon as you hear that the platter of the food is going to come on the table. This is an unconditioned stimuli. Okay, it's an unconditional stimuli. That means it will produce a response, but naturally, it does not require training. That's why it's called unconditioned. Another term that we need to know is conditioned stimuli. A stimuli that is neutral in the beginning, which is it is not giving any response in the beginning, but later it will be trained, it will be conditioned, and will produce a response. So that is called a conditioned response. That means it was capable of giving out a response, but we had to train it. We had to condition it. So let's come to another term that we have, which is called the unconditioned response. Like the unconditioned stimuli, this is a response which does not require any learning. It will happen automatically. So let's take an example when food can become an unconditioned stimuli. Your salivation, which is your mouth watering, becomes an unconditioned response. It's a basic need. When you feel hungry, there's an urge in the mouth which listens to the sound of the food coming and you mouth water. So that's an unconditioned response, which is it does not require any training. It will happen naturally. The response will come from the body without any training. Then come the conditioned response. So again, conditioned response requires conditioning. It will be conditioned to a particular stimuli. So that stimuli will lead to that response. So that's like a pairing of a conditioning stimuli to a conditioned response. So let's give you a quick recap for this so that we don't forget it. Ivan Pavlov's experiment was called the classical conditioning. Why did we say it classical? Because it was the first attempt on conditioning principles. And he did his experiments on his own dog. It was a dog experiment, very famous, that we will understand further. 4 major terms that we need to know, because this conditioning involves pairing of two stimuli. So it's an SSR learning. Then we have an unconditioned stimuli, a stimuli that does not require any conditioning. It will give out a response automatically. Then there is an unconditioned response, which is it will come out as a response automatically. You don't need to condition it. You don't need to train it. And then there is something which is called the conditioned stimuli. Conditioned stimuli are stimuli which are neutral in the beginning. Like it does not give out anything in the beginning. But later, it can be conditioned, it can be trained, and it can be giving you a stimuli, can elicit a response. It has the ability. It has the capacity. Similarly, conditioned response is what? Something which is trained and can give you a response. So training is required in conditioning. Whereas in unconditioned, the UCS does not require any conditioning. So it's a UCS, it's a CS, it's a CR, and a UCR. Right? Let's move ahead. What was the experiment? The experiment, as you see, the picture ahead on the screen, was divided into 3 parts. One part was before conditioning, when the training was not given. Then there was a part when there was a training given, like we did condition one stimuli to the other, and then was the testing time. Testing time is after conditioning. We want to see did the conditioning really happen or not. So as the picture over here, let's understand what happened. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov actually enclosed his dog in an enclosure. So how it was included, the dog was at the center, and you can find this picture in your BPC book also of Unit 4. The dog was his tongue area, his larynx area over here, the way where salivation takes place was connected with a tube, and there was a ball which was collecting the saliva, and it was associated with a meter to understand and to measure how much salivation happened with time. So that was how the dog was placed in an enclosure, and there was a bowl in front of the dog, which was the food bowl, which we will understand what happened. So remember, the dog was taken as an experimenter, an experimentee over here by Ivan Pavlov, because Ivan Pavlov noticed a very regular feature. Whenever he came out, whenever you serve your dogs or you serve your pet something and you take out the food box, don't you see your dogs getting excited, your cats getting excited, and they start salivating, they start moving around you, they get very excited, knowing that my food box is out. This is what even Ivan Pavlov noticed in his dog, that as soon as the food bowl came out, the dog started salivating. So did you understand? Salivation is very natural. It is not conditioned. So before conditioning, the food, which was just on its way, lead you to salivation. So what are we trying to find out? That food is leading to salivation. So this is a basic response. It's a basic need. Hunger is a basic need. It is an unconditioned stimuli, which is food, and unconditioned response becomes saliva. I hope you are able to connect to the terms that we have. Unconditional stimuli is something that can give a response naturally, and unconditional response is something that can give out a response, does not need any training. So before conditioning, before the dog was trained inside the enclosure, Pavlov gave out the food, and he found that the dog was salivating at a greater level as soon as the dog saw the food coming into play. Now, there is a neutral stimulus that is introduced. The neutral stimulus is a stimulus that can be conditioned. So we are going to condition the stimuli. Now imagine I ring the bell in front of the dog. Will anything happen here? Did anything happen to the Pavlov's dog? No, because bell will not do anything. It's a neutral stimulus. It is not capable of giving you a response until it is conditioned. So now begins the during conditioning phase, which is the second phase. Now what do? We use the bell first, which is you ring the bell, which is the neutral stimuli. You give the food, which is the unconditioned stimuli, and the dog salivates. This happened and took place, this training of ringing the bell, which is neutral stimuli, giving the food in a matter of like 30 seconds, a minute. Usually it happened within 30 seconds. As soon as the bell was rang, the food was given simultaneously mostly, and salivation took place. During conditioning, this process went on. We took this process to go on for a matter of days. So Ivan Pavlov did it for days. The bell was rang, the neutral stimuli, the food came out, and salivation happened. Bell was rang, food came out, and salivation happened. So there's a NS, which is neutral stimulus, which after that comes the unconditioned stimuli, and then comes the unconditioned response. So during conditioning, what is happening? We are trying to condition the bell over here. So after a matter of many days, now what? The dog is to be seen. Has he been conditioned or not? So what do we do after the trial, which is the last stage? This is the third phase, which is after conditioning. The dog hears the bell. The food does not come, but the dog is still salivating. Why? Because the condition has taken place. The bell is conditioned. So one stimulus actually commands that the second stimulus is coming, which is the food, which will lead to salivation. But what do? The neutral stimulus, which is the bell, now becomes the conditioning stimulus, which is it is conditioned, and leads to a conditioned response. You ring the bell, the food is not there, but the dog is still salivating. Why? Because the dog is anticipating that the food is coming. Because it is an S leading to another S leading to R. So that is what is called SSR conditioning. Keeping to know, I hope everyone understood this. We have three conditioning patterns here, which is three phases. One is before conditioning, where there was no conditioning, the UCS is shown and the UCR comes in. Then we condition the dog with a neutral stimulus, which was the bell. Bell initially cannot, the bell cannot give out any response because it's a neutral stimulus. But with the passage of time, when the bell is connected to the food simultaneously, the bell, the food, the bell, the food, the dog anticipate that after the ring of the bell, the food will come. So this completes with something which is classical conditioning. There are some principles of classical conditioning to understand that how is acquisition taking place. So can we change the pairing? Can we change the bell coming second and the food coming first or any time? So time plays a very important role in acquisition of your training or of your conditioning. So let's take an example. There are four. There is simultaneous, trace, backward, and delayed. Simultaneous conditioning is what was happening here. The bell and the food coming at the same time, and the CR will come. You ring the bell, you give the food. You ring the bell, you give the food. That is simultaneous conditioning. Then there is trace conditioning, which is you ring the bell first, and after a brief delay by UCS follows. So you have the bell, but there is traces of bells are still there. Like you ring the bell, and the sound of the bell is still ringing in the head, and the food comes in. That is called trace conditioning. Then there is something which is called the backward conditioning. Backward conditioning says we give the food first and then ring the bell. So now the food will tell the bell is coming. Ideally, this kind of conditioning is quite weaker. The best conditioning is simultaneous till now. Then comes the last, which is delayed conditioning. Delayed says that you ring the bell, but you wait for 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then give the food. So what are you doing? You're increasing the anticipation of the dog, thinking that the food will come, so keep salivating. We have rang the bell and the food will come. So the best kind of conditioning ideally is simultaneous for quick responses and quick conditioning. And then is delayed conditioning, the second best, so that you don't extinct. Extinct as in there are possibility that extinction takes place of responses. When does extinction takes place? That means salivation will stop when you stop giving the food. You keep ringing the bell and never give the food. Don't you think the salivation will stop? Conditioning will stop. So delayed conditioning increases the anticipation. You ring the bell, wait for 10 to 15 minutes. This way, the dog keeps salivating until the food comes in. So the anticipation increases, the training gets better. Simultaneous and delayed conditioning is one of the nicest conditioning that we have here. Also, there are some principles of classical conditioning which will be similar in the later conditioning also that we will study. So you better be remembering this really well. Acquisition is something that we've already done, which was simultaneous conditioning, trace conditioning, delayed and backward. That was the first principle, and is also one of the basic thing to understand that how do we acquire conditioning. The second principle is generalization. Generalization is a very simple thing that you see around yourself also. It is, responding to a particular stimuli in a particular way. And there is possibility that you should not be, how is generalization? I'll give you an example of the dog experiment only. When the dog generalizes that the phone bell is his bell. So remember, whenever the phone also rings, the dog starts salivating. So this is what the dog is unable to differentiate between the two ring bells and actually generalizes both to be same. So that is an inability also to discriminate, and it is responding similar way to similar kind of similar. So it could be the phone bell, it could be the doorbell. So the dog generalizes it. We also have this thing, at times when you're watching somebody who looks very similar from the backside, and you go and wave them, thinking that that's your friend, but you're only from the back. That's generalization that happens. Another ability is discrimination. Discrimination is opposite of generalization. Your ability to differentiate between similar kind of stimuli is called discrimination, which is when the dog is able to understand the doorbell is separate from the kind of bell that I have. So that is called as discrimination. Then I spoke about extinction. What is extinction? In classical conditioning, extinction would be when the subject does not produce a conditioned response, which is not salivating in the presence of CS. That means the bell is ringing, but the salivation is not happening. Why is it not happening? Because you have stopped giving the food. The second stimuli is not proceeding. That's why it leads to something which is extinction. Extinction is highly possible when you do not produce the food, which is you do not produce the second stimuli in the process of training. Now, coming to a spontaneous recovery, which is the last principle, it is said that spontaneous recovery is mostly seen. So we say this principle is mostly seen. When we say it's mostly seen, that means there can be possibilities that spontaneous recovery also might be missing at times. So this is something like we ring the bell, there is something which is the food which is not coming. There is a possibility that extinction has happened in a passage of 1 week, and 2-3 days have passed, and suddenly, when you ring the bell again, the salivation happens. So, spontaneous recovery is the sudden reappearance of salivation, which is sudden reappearance of the conditioned response when the dog hears the conditioned stimuli. So, that sudden reappearance happens after a lapse of time. That lapse of time needs to be good enough. You cannot do it after 1 day. It can be 15 days, it can be a month. It should not be more than 6 months. 6 months will actually lead to extinction. So, spontaneous recovery, as I said, is a principle that happens sometimes and does not happen the other times. Now, principles of classical conditioning get completed to understand the entire understanding of classical conditioning happening in our environment. So, can we apply this conditioning in our day to day life? This was actually represented and shown to us, demonstrated to us by Rosalie Renier, also a experimenter who conducted this experiment on a 9-month-old child called Albert. This Albert experiment is very famous. It was the first human experiment that was done on a child, and Watson hypothesized, J.B. Watson, who was the founder of behaviorist approach in evolution, stated that children's fearful response to loud noise is an unconditioned response, which is very true. Children are actually fearful of loud noises, big bangs around themselves. So, isn't that an unconditioned stimuli and unconditioned response? Sound and fear. Now we can train this. What was happening? We can see, you guys can all view this Rosalian experiment, which was also very famously available as videos of this little child, where he was shown white color animals, white color bear, time and again. So when these white color bears were shown, the child usually will cuddle as a toy. There is no fear associated. Now what we will do? The white color rat, which was shown to Albert in the beginning, instigated no fear. Now what happened? The loud noise was rang before the rat was shown. So there was a loud sound, then the rat, loud sound, and then the rat. And this, what will the loud sound give us? The loud sound will give us fear because it is an unconditioned response. But we are conditioning it with the mouse. So the sound was given, the mouse was shown to them, which is the mouse becomes what? It becomes the neutral stimulus. So you show the mouse, you ring the bell, or the loud sound, the screeching loud sound was shown to the child. So it's the mouse, the sound, fear. The mouse, the sound, and the fear. So what is happening? The neutral stimulus is shown with the passage of time, and during conditioning, repeated conditioning of this will create fear in the child. Now remove the sound and just show the rat. The child will show fear or in comparison to the rat, where in the beginning the white color toys and white color animals were not feared by the child. So this is CS is equal to CR, which is now the rat was also able to instigate fear as a conditioned response. So this is classical conditioning, one of the most beautiful experiments which was done by Rosalie Renier, and it was a very famous experiment. And this can also be applied outside too, suggesting that phobias at times happen because of wrong conditioning. We condition children by stating, "Oh, cockroaches are very huge; they will eat you up," and this is how small animals can be related to something which is big fears to children. This completes with the first most theory that we have. Now we have Skinner's instrumental conditioning, a very different conditioning, and a conditioning that you see in day-to-day life of yours, which is something which is more reflecting in the society. It is something that you will find more evident in your environment. So, what is instrumental conditioning? This is a kind of learning that involves behaviors or action that is instrumental in producing a reinforcement which operates on the environment. That means operant conditioning is based on something which is like producing an action based on a reinforcement. So it is, let's understand it by the equation that will make it more easy for you to understand. So there is an S and there is an R, but the stimulus will give a response when there's a consequence. So there has to be a reward, only then you will get a response. So conditioning will happen when the child knows that I have a reward or a punishment coming. So this was operant conditioning is based on also the research of Edward L. Thorndike and B.F. Skinner, and majorly the experiment of B.F. Skinner that we will study right now. So I'll give you a simple example for this before we start with the experiment. Like for example, we want a child to do really good in maths, and we tell the child, "You do great in your maths, and I will give you your favorite meal after full out of full numbers of yours." So the child makes an attempt. Now, what is happening? Initially, the child was not working hard. The response is desired good numbers, a good performance. What is the stimulus? The maths test. So child, whenever the maths test is there, will start working now. Why? Not because of the numbers, but the child will work because of the consequence. So this is a kind of behavior which is achieved, which is a kind of conditioning which is achieved because of a reinforcement. It is also called consequential conditioning, because everything is happening because of the consequence. It's happening because of the reward that you have. And also at times we can also inhibit it by punishment. Children lying, we can stop it by punishment. So children will stop responding in a particular manner when we give them a punishment. So child knows I'll be punished, let's not lie. So this is again a kind of learning which is happening because of the consequence, because of the reinforcement which is producing the behavior. The behavior ideally is not responsible on the stimuli. The behavior is responsible and is by the reward, is by the consequence. So let's understand there are kind of two rewards. What are reinforcers? Reinforcers are defined as cues and triggers that increases the desirability of a behavior. So it's a process which increases the desirability of a desired response. Those are reinforcers. Reinforcers can be of two kinds. It can be a primary reinforcer and it can be a secondary reinforcer also. Primary reinforcers are basic. Basic as in basic needs. Food. The example that I gave of the food is the basic need. Giving them a candy, probably giving them a clean room to sit in the house. So mother cleaning the room of the child and telling them that you come on time after play and your room would be clean for you. So the child will come on time to see, oh, my room is clean, it's neat, and I can now peacefully sit and have my meals there. So that is again a basic need. Hunger, thirst, and sex is all basic need. Then we have secondary reinforcers. What are secondary reinforcers? Secondary reinforcers could be a praise, a pat on the back, something which is more environmental, coming from the outside. It's not a part of your body and your basic need, not a part of your survival that you have. So it could be a pat on the back, it could be a chocolate. More than a chocolate, I feel it could be something which is giving a cycle ride to the child. It could be an acclaim amongst friends. I will clap for you amongst your friends if you do this. Also, there are schedules of reinforcement that we will do after understanding the experiment. I will show the picture and now explain you the experiment. This was one of the most famous experiments that we had, which was an experiment which was done on the rat. This experiment stated that hungry rats were placed in a Skinner box. These are B.F. Skinner, and it is very famous by the B.F. Skinner boxes that we have. So Skinner made a box where the hungry rats were fetched in, like they were moved inside it. Now the rats could get food by pressing the lever. So there is a lever that you see, a speaker, there's a light, there's a lever which is above, and there's a dispenser that you see in the picture. So the lights go on. Now that as soon as the light goes on, remember that the lever can be now pressed. Now whenever we send a hungry rat inside, what will happen? The rat will move around because that rat is hungry. He wants food. Now in the beginning it was found, rat took a lot of time to find the liver. It took him like a lot of time, a lot of number of minutes to find the liver. And he presses the liver, it presses the liver and the food comes out. Now the rat has understood that the food is coming out by pressing the liver. Second time. Second day, the rat was sent in again. Hungry rat, obviously, all agitated, wants to eat food. Now the rat takes a little lesser time than the time on the first day to press the liver. Because the rat has understood, I will get the food, and the desired behavior is what? The desired behavior is to press the liver. Once you press the liver, which is the desired behavior, which is the desired response, is the pellets coming, which is the reward to the rats that we are talking about. Now, after a week, it was found the hungry rat is now trained. The hungry rat is conditioned. SR in consequence. I have to press the lever, which is response, as because I'm hungry and I will get the pellets. So why are we pressing the liver? We are pressing the liver because we are getting the reward. We are getting those food pellets on the dispenser. After a week, as soon as the rat was sent inside the Skinner box, the rat pressed the liver in a matter of few seconds. So the conditioning, instrumental conditioning is complete. Because of the reward coming in the dispenser, which is the food, the rat has pressed the liver in a matter of few seconds. This completes instrumental conditioning experiment. Let's understand what kind of reinforcements do we have. See, reinforcement positive increases the likelihood that your desired behavior will happen. So when the positive reinforcement was this rat experiment only, that it gets the food. The example that I give you of the child, that the child is going to do great in its maths tests because no, I'm going to get my favorite meal at home today. So if I get a 10 out of 10, my mother is going to give me my favorite meal today, my favorite food today. So that is something which we talk about is positive reinforcement. There is something which is called the negative reinforcement also. Negative reinforcement is something that is taken when we that it's not something which is SR in consequence. It is an unwanted stimuli that we want to avoid, and that's why we are responding. So there is no reward here. So here the loud noise that stopped when the liver passes. So the experiment, when if you want to understand the noise, the speaker which is there, that speaker will stop giving the noise. So let's take an example. We have now loud noise in the entire Skinner box. If you want to avoid the noise, which is avoid the unwanted stimuli. So it's unwanted stimuli and response, no consequence. So negative reinforcement is S and R. So the R is there because you want to avoid the stimuli. So loud noise, the rat wants to avoid the noise, presses the liver. As soon the rat goes inside, so there are two versions of the experiment. First is just the food, the next is the speaker to understand the negative reinforcement. So remember, if unwanted stimuli is avoided to take the response. I'll give you a better example for this. When our mothers are always shouting, please clean the room, and they're scolding you all the time. Now, one odd day you come home, you're in a very good mood, and oh, my room is messed up. You want to avoid that scolding. So, to avoid that scolding, what do you do? Scolding is the unwanted stimuli. To avoid that stimuli, which is unwanted scolding, you clean your room. Desired behavior is there, but by avoiding the unwanted stimuli. So, there is no consequence here, please remember. Now, that is reward. Now there are punishments also that can be a consequence. We can use punishment too because I've mentioned it on my screen. Punishment is also positive punishment and negative punishment. Punishment will always decrease the likelihood of wrong behaviors. Lying could be something which could be a wrong behavior. Coming late can be a wrong behavior. So let's take an example. I'm not giving the mouse experiment. You can check the mouse experiment an example. A child who lies all the time is punished. There are times that parents usually punish in terms of physical punishment, scold the child all the time. So the child, knowing that I'll be scolded or probably be beaten, so I would more not be lying the next time. So that is a positive punishment. In the case of the mouse is shocked when the liver is pressed. So if we don't want the rat to press the liver, we might include shocks over there. So to avoid that, the mouse will never press the liver. Again, another example, when children touch items or fire items and they touch candle, once they burn themselves, that's like a punishment to them and they will never repeat the behavior. So what has happened? The candle burning hands, the sudden burn to the body, the sudden accident to the body has made the child learn it's a punishment that I should not be playing with fire again. So that's also a positive punishment. There are negative punishment, but which is not applicable. Negative punishments are usually punishment which are a little more harsher. They lead to increasing the negative behavior rather than increasing the positive behavior. So we only stick to punishments. Punishment decreases the likelihood of desired behavior. So if you need a behavior which is a good behavior of the child in class and not beating the other individuals. So the child says, I'm always scolded when I hit this child, so let me not do it, else I'll be scolded or sent out of the class. That was the old traditional punishments that classes had. You are sent out of the class. Children now enjoy it, so we cannot give it as a punishment nowadays. Otherwise, that's the classic experiment of punishment. The principle of instrumental conditioning remains the same. We have extinction, we have generalization, we have discrimination too. When will extinction take place? Extinction will happen when we do not reward the child. So let's take an example. A child is done beautifully in maths and gets 10 out of 10. But accidentally the mother forgets to reward, forgets to make the favorite meal. Now the child feels, when I'm getting a good mark and I'm not getting the reward, what's the point? The child will not do the behavior. So desired behavior, the R which was conditioned response as good behavior extincts because the child does not get the reinforcement. So that completes with instrumental conditioning. And there are some additional concepts that we should understand, which are a part of these conditioning, which is an amalgamation of these conditioning. One was called a process of learning helplessness. This was given by Martin Seligman, and it was a combination of classical conditioning and instrumental conditioning working and in an experiment which was done in 1960s. So while working on classical conditioning with dogs, animals are repeatedly subjected to aversive stimuli, like something which is not good. Let's take an example. Animals are subjected to shocks which it cannot escape. You know what happens once an animal learns that I'm getting a shock in this box again and again? A state occurs when they experience a stressful situation repeatedly and they don't want to control it now because they know I cannot come out of the box. They learn the helplessness, they learn the persistent helplessness of not being able to do things. This also happens with children. When you're not able to score in a subject and you repeatedly get bad marks in a subject, you repeatedly not perform well in a subject, you feel demotivated. The stressful condition makes you understand that I cannot perform well, I cannot escape the unfortune, I have to get bad marks. That's when children say, how matter what I study, I'm always getting moderate marks. So children accept that helplessness and they end up learning it because they know that they cannot escape it. And with the passage of time, when it gets repeated and repeated and repeated, they come to believe I cannot change it. The situation cannot change. I do not want to try. They will not pick up opportunities. They will not change their behavior. So that's how we also learn helplessness at times, which is called learned helplessness. This event was given by Marty Seligman in the 1960s. Now, another thing, at times we need to know the tricks. Like animals are something which is another second intelligent beings after human beings. No matter gorillas, which is the most closest animal to us, dogs, which are so beautifully intelligent, they do tricks for us. How do we train them, and how it is possible? And in even circuses, did you see animals doing tricks? How is it possible? It is possible because of two patterns and two concepts of learning. One is shaping, the other is chaining. At times, both can be used, and at times, we can just use one. So, when we talk about shaping, what is shaping? It's a process of changing. It's changing and learning a new behavior, in which successive close approximation of desired behavior is reinforced. That means slightest of good behavior seen is reinforced. So, closest approximation means. So, let's take an example. If a child is told that if you do great in your academics, and the child gets, like, let's take an example, in the UTs in the middle term, the child is increased 1 to 2%. The final percentage is not reached, but it's a closer approximation that the child has started doing better. So the behavior is reinforced. The deadline is not reached yet, but closer approximation is reached. The improvement is coming into play. We end up reinforcing the child. So that is, the organism is rewarded in smaller steps towards the targeted behavior. So until the final is reached, the child will be kept reinforced. So this also what happens, when the elephants and the animals are doing the tricks, smallest of their good tricks, their ability to stand, their ability to stand in two legs. As soon as they make an effort, they are reinforced. They are given something. So this is shaping. We are reinforcing every small step that they do. Then comes chaining. Chaining ideally is not very similar to, it's very opposite. It talks about any complex behavior or skill of chains of behaviors that happen, and the process of chaining involves breaking the behavior into parts and sequences, and then you reinforce the final step, not the chains. Whereas in shaping, we reinforce smaller steps. In chaining, we break it into smaller parts, like a chain sort of a thing. So let's take an example. A child is weak in every subject. So now the child starts with English, starts performing well. Then we break it and we tell them that, now you need to do good in maths. Let's start it with parts. You do this part of maths first, learn them, get it better. Half a part, like if the trigonometry is done well, and then the algebra is done well, and then the composite entirely targeted behavior, that maths is understood better. then the reinforcement is given. We do not reinforce the smallest step, whereas we have broken down the targeted behavior into chains, but we only reinforce the final behavior. That is called chaining. Chaining simply means a complex big behavior is divided into parts and the final part is reinforced. Then we come to something which is Primark principle. Primark principle was given by David Primark only, and that's how it is named after David Primark. It is a principle of reinforcement only. According to this principle, a more preferred behavior is reinforced than the less preferred behavior. This is also called grandma's rule. So let's take an example. The aggressive running behavior is very much appreciated while you're competing with people and you show aggression is reinforced, but hitting people randomly is not. So see, both are same. So the more preferred one is reinforced. So it's like a grandma rule. Two similar kind of behaviors will be there, but the better preferred behavior would be reinforced. Now going back to the understanding of something which is called as schedules of reinforcement. So I go to the slide back to us. There are two schedules of reinforcement, continuous and partial. Continuous reinforcement would be what kind of reinforcement? I continue the same example. Child is being told you will get a reward, which is good meals after great maths paper, right? So this child gets 10 out of 10, gets a reinforcement. Remember, child does a class test also well, 5 out of 10, 5 out of 5. You give a reinforcement. So what are we doing? We are continuously rewarding each good behavior. So none of the behavior is left at all. Then when we talk about partial reinforcement talks about that you reinforce some and you do not reinforce the other. So this could be that you reinforce the first best behavior, then the fourth best behavior, then probably the 10th best behavior. So we do it partially. Sometimes it is done and sometimes it is not done. It is stated for extinction to not take place. So if you want that your behaviors are not lost if they are not rewarded, partial reinforcement is the best reinforcement, and also delayed reinforcement. You give it a little later, you give it after a time later. So let's continue with a new pattern, which is social learning, which is Albert Bandura's learning that we have. So Albert Bandura's learning is a very simple learning that we have that we will talk about. It was one of the famous experiment I've even mentioned. It was the Bobo doll experiment that we have. Bobo doll experiment is one of the famous experiment of social learning theory. Social learning theory stated we all learn our behavior socially. Haven't you all seen that maximum of our behavior, our values, our interaction, our communication skills, our interpersonal behaviors, which are survival skills today, are learned through observational learning. What is observational learning? Having a role model, a model that you want to observe, and something where the model is reinforced and something you see their behavior, you observe their behavior, and you copy them. So that is called as direct observation. There can be an indirect observation also, which is through experiences. Indirect observation is, let's take an example. You want to go to a trip. Let's take an example. You want to go to a trekking trip, and the trekking trip is taken by one of your friend also before. So when you take that trekking trip initially, your friends come. You ask them, "How was your experience? Tell me. I am also going next week." That is learning from other people's experiences. That is called as indirect. So indirect, why? Because you're learning from other people's experiences. Now, as an introduction, knowing observation learning is a learning which is found everywhere. It is observing other people's behavior and taking care of something which is observing the model, imitating, copying, and having it within you. So that is observation. Let's come to the experiment that we have. That's the Bobo doll experiment. Bobo doll experiment has been the famous experiments that we have. Bobo doll experiment, as Albert Bandura's one of the most famous experiment, and something which was also taken down not only for social structures and social settings. It also claims that we learn maximum values, maximum social interaction through social learning. So stating, let's understand, Bobo doll experiment was again done on human experiments, like humans, little children. So three groups of children were there, and ideally, the reason that Albert Bandura started this experiment was that aggression was coming into the society at a great verge, and children were actually observing aggressive behaviors and getting aggressive. So when we talk about this, the groups of children were also divided into three. So what was happened? I don't know if children remember today. We had Bobo dolls when we were young. Those helium-filled balls that you punch and they come back. You punch and they come back. They are very good stress busters. And when we talk about them as stress busters, they are used in the same experiment too. So you see three. The first as a picture, the second was another group, and third was the last group. First group was shown a video. This is an experimental group. They were shown a video where people, role models, were hitting the bobo doll aggressively, punching, trying to tear it away. The second group, video was not shown, and the aggressive behavior was not shown to him. Like the video was played, but aggressive behavior was not shown. Very pleasing, normal behavior was shown. Whereas then the last is the control group. Control group suggests control group of experiment is where we do not show the independent variable. The video was only not shown to it. So three groups. First group has a video. Second group also has a video. But the first group has aggressive behavior videos. Second group is shown the video, but the video does not have explicit aggression. Simple playing, simple moving with bobo doll, whereas the last has no video at all. It was found that children with the first video shown were highly aggressive. I hope you can see in the picture also the lighted blue tinted children are throwing, punching, sitting on the bobo doll, trying to tear it away also. So see, this suggests that observation learning is highly involved in our environment, and also that observational learning is something which is found maximally in our environment, and aggression, violence, and rights are an example of this. We see around our environment in India, at times, the rights are motivated and are inculcated and cropped in a way that most people who are being a part of the right or being a part of the mob behavior do not know why it's happening. They are completely, they're completely clueless why it's happening. They just observe other people, they enjoy the adrenal rush, and they hit other people, and they be a part of that mob and the right behavior that you have, riots that happen in India. Also, this is one of the best learning principles that we have around, maximally used in children. That's why we tell children to have better role models, and something which help them, support them to learn values, to support good behaviors, to learn social behaviors through imitation. So that's how aggression is also learned through social media today, and also at times, violent behaviors also by children are learned through social media. Some cognitive processes that impact social behavior learning. So when we talk about this learning theory and observational learning theory, there are some cognitive processes. Cognition is what? Thinking, learning. So some processes that will impact your observational learning would be something written on your screen. You can check: attend, retain, reproduce, and motivate. So remember, these four things can increase your observation learning. It can decrease your observational learning. Like attend, the better that you attend to the role model, don't you think the better that you will perform? The better that you have retained it, like observed well, understood well, and retained in your mind, that is called as better retained, better reproduced. The better that you retain is better that you will reproduce. And if, let's take an example of a child is very highly motivated, that I want to perform something, that would be something as more motivated, better the performance. So let's take an example. You give a child a role model that the child does not want to be. He does not or she does not like the role model. Remember, if it does not like the role model, they are not motivated to show that observational learning. This completes with a new concept of social learning theory. Let's move to another kind of learning, which is called cognitive learning. Cognitive learning are learning that involves cognitive processes like thinking, reasoning, problem solving, and at times they do not have that mechanical process of SR conditioning. So difference from conditioning to cognitive learning is they do not have an exact SR connection. So let's start with the first cognitive learning that we have. It's cognitive learning, which was Tolman's learning. Tolman's learning was called as latent learning. What is latent learning? Latent learning is something which is hidden. The term latent means hidden. It was given by Edward Tolman, and it was again on a group of animals, which was, Tolman used rats here, and a maze was given. I've shown a picture of the maze also. Again, this learning suggested us that we have that learning within us, but it is shown, it is demonstrated and expressed when it is reinforced or when the conducive environment is there. So when there is a conducive environment, when you have the reinforcement, only then you show that behavior. Until that remains hidden within us. So explain that we had an experiment done on rats. There were again three groups. Group one was the control group, where the rats were started at group in the maze learning started at one point and were fed the cheese at the end. So group one gets the cheese at the end. The group two was not rewarded in the first 6 days, but later they were rewarded. The group three was not rewarded for 2 days, and later they were. So it was found that the rats who got the cheese on the first day itself, group one, actually represented their maze learning very quickly. They were faster than any group. So second time when group was actually placed in the maze, the zigzag area to find the final position, the group one reached in minimum time in comparison to group 3 and 4, group 2 and 3. Why? Because the group 2 was given the reward, given the cheese after 2-3 days. So it took them time in comparison to group 1. So it's a simple learning which is called latent learning, hidden within us. It will be hidden and not demonstrated until you are reinforced. Then there was another experiment that was done on chimpanzees and chimps because they're the closest to us. It was done by Kohler. It is called insight learning. Simple experiment that is called a learning which is sudden realization, the aha moment, the eureka moment, which is the creativity springs up. Again, no SR connection. Why? Because there is no stimulus and response. The solution, this learning stated that the solution comes instantly to you from somewhere as an insight. That's why it's a eureka moment. And this was an experiment which was done on chimps, and the chimpanzees was placed in a cage, and the cage was having a banana which was hanging from the roof, and boxes were kept in the cage. Now the chimpanzee were trying to jump and pull down the bananas, but the bananas couldn't come down. Suddenly, after 15-20 minutes, there was an insight that struck the chimpanzee. He placed one box over the other, climbed over the box, and took off the banana. So that is a sudden solution to a problem. So that is called as the eureka moment, the aha feeling, and an insight learning. Again, does not have an SR connection. It is not like cognitive learnings that we have. Very small, simple two learnings of cognitive, which was latent and insight learning. Now, there are strategies that you can, enhance your learning and get it better. 3 simple ways. Mental imagery. Remember, if I ask you, mental imagery is what? The ability to imagine things in your conscious and remember it more efficiently. So if I ask you how many chairs are there in your room, I'm sure you'll close your eyes and quickly count the number of chairs and tell, right? So how has that happened? You are being able to produce an information because of the mental imagery, the ability to visualize. One best way to enhance your learning. Second best way is to rehearse, repeat something. So rehearsals can happen in 2 ways. One is maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance is rote learning. You rote learn one after the other, keep repeating, rote learn, and you get an answer. Elaborate rehearsal is second, whereas word meaning. So if you've understood the classical conditioning well today with me, if you've understood the why and how with me, you will remember them well. So that is called as elaborate rehearsals. So elaborate and maintenance rehearsals are different. How? You rehearse in maintain by rote learning, repeating it again. In elaborate by understanding the meaning, the whys and hows. The last is organization. Organizations means reorganizing of information according to the categories that you like. Let's take an example. I give you a category of pictures to you, which has places and which has names. I'm sure you will cluster the names separately and the places separately. So that is category clustering that you have done. So you have organized information and learned them better. This facilitates your process of learning. It makes it more quicker that you talk about. So this is what is called as strategies of learning. Now, let's move to the 4th unit as an introduction today before we finish, which is memory. So we understood how learning is such an important sphere. We understood that learning happens through conditioning, which was classical, which was instrumental. We had observational learning, which is most closest to humankind. Why? Because we learn everything through observation. Now, once you've learned something, don't you think you need to memorize it? You need to memorize, you need to retain it, then only you will be able to reproduce it. So learning will go waste if you cannot reproduce it, you cannot put it in your memory. So what is memory? Memory refers to the ability of retaining information and reproducing it over the time when required to perform a cognitive task. So when you want to perform a cognitive task, Remember, you need to do what? You require memory. The ability to retain information is memory. So better you retain, the better you will reproduce. So memory is two major function. Remember, your memory needs to do two bigger things, which is retain and reproduce. And it is conceptualized in three stages, which is memory is understood in three bigger stages that we have. One is three stages, sorry, the not one: encoding, retaining, and retrieval. So remember, everything that you take in your mind will follow these three stages, which is encoding, taking the information, like whatever that I'm saying right now, you are converting that information in your memory to understand it better. You encode, you receive it, you received, and now you store it. So let's take an example. You encoded all the experiments today with me, the animal experiments, the dog, the rat experiment. You converted it into a kind of way where you could store it better, maybe visually by the experiments of dog experiment, or probably a video of it. So that is storage. After encoding, we store the information, and the last process of memory is what? You retrieve it when it's required. So let's take an example of your examination. How do you process for examination? Through these three ways. You read your books, you store the information of the books that you read, and you give the paper, which is retrieval. Simple encoding, storage, and retrieval that you have. So memory always will have these three stages. So whatever that you remember will have all these three stages. There are theory models of memory that we have, and one of the most famous model is something that I will leave you with today, which is the most the most impressive model that you will find, and that will make your understanding of memory so explainable and so beautiful. This model was given by Atkinson and Shiffrin. Both their names are Richard Atkinson and Richard Shiffrin, so you can call them as Atkinson and Shiffrin in 1968. It is called the model of memory. It is also called the stage model, and this came up by understanding that how memory can be divided into stages. So we have three kinds of memory. Remember, that's how they set stages. So I will only equip you with minimal today, which is there are three stages, which is called as sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term. So remember, they happen in a term of a sequence only. They will not happen like that. So information comes from sensory inputs like your audition, vision. Like at the moment when you're listening to me on the screen, it's the vision, it's the audition, also the sensation on the skin which are moving. So that is environmental input that will go to sensory memory, because it only takes information in your sense organs. So that is sensory memory that you have. And after sensory memory, the information, if it is attended well, if you heard me well today, you understood my lecture well today, it will go to the short-term memory. Short-term memory is also very small. It is of almost like 30 seconds or so. So if you attend and you send that information that you heard me, it will move to the short-term memory. Remember, if you did not hear me well, from the short term, it will be forgotten, decayed. Major terminologies will be forgotten by you, right? And if you heard me well, you might hear me again and again. You might see it, my lecture again and again. You maintain. What are you doing? You're rehearsing it. You want to elaborate rehearse also, and you want to maintain rehearse also. So what are you doing? You're doing the two things together. You're rote learning my formulas also, and you're understanding it also. So that is the two rehearsals when happen on short term goes to the long term. And now retrieval will happen from the long term memory. Long term is the highest capacity, longest storage, largest storage. All your memories, all everything of your past moments in life are falling in your long term memory. The biggest memory. The most shortest and the most fragile memory is which? It is the sensory memory. It's very fragile, because information over there settles and stays only for something which is a matter of fraction of seconds. I'll give you an example. In the morning, when you go to your college or you go to meet a friend and you take a route which is similar from 7 days, you are only moving from that area and not observing other things. You're not attending at the moment, only moving through that area. There might be a pillar, there might be three buildings, that might be a check post over there that you might have not noticed. Why? Sensory memory takes in thousands of information, but it will only remember it to the short-term memory if you attend to it well. If you do not attend to it well, it is forgotten. You forget it there and then. Similarly, happen to short-term memory. If it is not maintained, which is if you do not rehearse it properly, if you do not elaborately rehearse it properly, it is forgotten. But if you do it, it goes to the longest memory, which is the long-term memory. That's why it was called the stage model. Remember, all your information everything that you are learning, everything that you are understanding in the environment and observing is something that requires as the stage model, works as stage model. Information coming from sensory outputs, going to the short-term memory. If not remembered well, the information goes away, vanishes from there. If you remember it well, it moves to something which is long-term memory. So it's one of the most famous model, one of the most easiest model that you have, and it is given by something which is Atkin and Shiffrin that you have. I hope you understood it all. Thank you. Namaste.